Welcome to Dental Success Beyond Chairside, the podcast that's dedicated to revolutionising the way dental professionals succeed beyond the dental chair. Join us for a unique blend of insightful interviews with industry experts to help you thrive in your dental specialist practice. In each 20-minute episode, we'll delve into a variety of subjects, including HR, marketing, innovative techniques and systems, and AI to help transform your practice and unlock its full potential. Whether you're a dentist or specialist looking to enhance your practice, this podcast is your go-to resource for professional, personal, and profitable success. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Dental Success Beyond Chairside. Did you know that current legislation mandates the monitoring of psychosocial hazards in workplaces? Are you familiar with what psychosocial hazards entail? Today, I'm joined by Anh Makkar, a former general dentist who has transitioned into the field of positive psychology and wellbeing. With her first-hand experience in the dental industry, Anh can provide valuable insights into psychosocial hazards and guide us on ensuring compliance with these regulations. Anh, please share your journey and explain what these new regulations mean for dental practices.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It's always lovely to see you and chat with you. My journey, as you mentioned, I am a former general dentist. I worked as a dentist for 7 years, graduated in 2013 and practiced until 2020. I thoroughly enjoyed my time in dentistry for the most part, but towards the end I did start to experience some struggles which, now that I'm looking back, I may not have realised what exactly I was struggling with. But through my transition into positive psychology and wellbeing, I've learned a lot more about what makes a workplace healthy, what individuals and employers can do, and of course also things like psychosocial hazards and their effects on staff well-being and performance and all these other measures as well. You did mention that the regulations around work health and safety did relatively recently change in Australia. What this means is that the regulations have encompassed psychosocial hazards under the work health and safety umbrella. They've added it to the regulations and just more clearly defined psychosocial hazards. And I suppose this really reflects the growing importance of recognizing these types of hazards as a separate category. Say, for example, separate from physical, which might be a bit more tangible and easy to measure. Of course, like any law upgrades and regulation upgrades, it is important that we're aware of them and being able to find ways of not just ensuring compliance, which is important, but it goes further than that, which is more about the staff and the well-being of the people that are working for you, because it has so many positive benefits down the track as well.
That's what we've been speaking about in this series, is obviously attracting and retaining your staff and wanting to have a positive environment to be in. These recent employee relations, they're the biggest changes since Fair Work was introduced in 2010. This legislation came in, I think, October 2022, but now we need to understand in the dental industry and in practices what we can do. We've got Pauline Tarrant, who is talking about work health and safety and how to get surveys and things like that. I feel you're an expert in the field of dentistry because you did suffer that burnout. I want to look at things that actually happen, what psychosocial hazards are in the dental practices, and what perhaps we can do to help our employees. If you can give us some examples, Anh, that would be excellent.
Sure. I think it's important to be able to define clearly what psychosocial hazards are. And as mentioned before, things like physical hazards are much more, I guess, easy to wrap our minds around, especially in the dental industry, because we do work with a lot of physical hazards such as sharps and chemicals. Psychosocial hazards are defined as any factors in the work setting that can cause stress or psychological distress. Obviously, that includes things like mental health issues, stress, burnout. It can also also impact negatively, not just on the psychology of a staff member, but it can also affect the interpersonal relationships. As you can see, it's not as tangible as, say, a Sharp's hazard, but definitely it's very important that we understand the definition so that we can, I guess, clearly understand what we're looking for and put strategies in place to try to mitigate those hazards and ensure that our workplaces are as healthy as possible, so that people that work in the workplace are not only safe, but they're thriving, they're engaging, and they have the best performance and output as well.
You personally, Anne, if I can understand, do you think you're putting under pressure and you didn't actually realise, and now after you've left the industry, you've realised there was things to do, but was it the job demands, or was it the people, or was it the template? Are there tangible sort of things that you have now noticed, I suppose, that actually affected how you felt?
I can give you a few examples. Depending on the workplaces that I went to, but some of the ones that I experienced, and I totally understand that there's also an individual responsibility as well, because it is a shared responsibility between individuals and organizations. I've grown up a lot since then and realized certain things, but I'd probably say some of the examples I experienced were definitely like the job demands, especially if you want to do really good quality dentistry. There's no doubt that there are various types of demands placed on the clinicians, such as physical, emotional, mental, in terms of like concentrating, things like that, treating anxious patients, time pressures, financial pressures, things like that. I'd say that was a big example for me in terms of the job demands, and maybe not being able to set boundaries or advocate for myself when those demands started to get higher than what I was able to cope with. I think like anything, really good communication and really strong relationships to begin with are really important. That way employers can treat each of their clinicians as individuals, not so that we don't feel like we need to sort of follow the template of the practice, for example, because perhaps I needed more time for a procedure compared to my colleague, but I just sort of thought, I had to sort of mold myself into the whatever was considered normal for that particular practice. I would say really getting to know the staff member on an individual basis in terms of their preferences, what they need, because we all need different things, various different resources that they would feel would result in their best work. Getting to know them and understanding also like their strengths, maybe what they want to improve on. Generally, it's about that communication and getting to know them so that we can tailor certain things that might be able to really make a positive benefit for that particular person.
As a clinician, what I'm thinking is part of the onboarding process. Usually if the dentist comes on, they might be a new graduate, and then you sort of mentor them clinically, but you don't actually understand their individualized needs. Maybe as part of that onboarding process to have that touch point, but it needs to be very specific to you because things are different. And I think that's probably a really good thing for owners to take on, to perhaps think about that when they're onboarding their clinicians, because their clinicians are creating income for them as well. You do want them to stay long term, and maybe as an exit strategy, you'd want your associate to actually buy your practice. For Ross, and I think I've said this in previous episodes, it's really hard because, as we've said, clinicians are very empathetic. They're very compassionate. That's why they've gone into the health industry. And then a lot of patients come in and go, I'm paying for your car. Nothing against you, but I hate dentists. Essentially, they're saying, I hate you and you're charging me too much. Having that every day is really hard as well. Do you think that's a psychosocial hazard?
It definitely is, because that affects the emotional and psychological side. So again, just being aware of that, and maybe even having conversations or avenues for support, so that if anyone feels like they need to talk about it or find ways of creating boundaries so that they're able to cope with certain things that patients say. And I think it's more about keeping that dialogue open so that we're encouraging clinicians to come forward, as opposed to feeling like they can't say anything at any point, because that comes under the culture and the leadership, and feeling safe enough to be able to speak up when there's any concerns, and not feeling like you've just got to like deal with everything or suppress everything down, or it's just part of the job. job, because I think a lot of people do get affected by that long term, and there are ways of being able to maybe move through that or manage it, or even like deflect or create boundaries or something, so we don't take those words and unconsciously absorb them and not even realize over time that it's affecting us more than we thought it was.
That's interesting, because I mean, obviously I always advocate meetings and things like that for that open communication. And there's a clinic meeting that's just talking about things that are happening in the clinic and maybe admin, and then a team meeting. Maybe it might be worthwhile to have those clinician meetings just about how you're feeling or what's happening and what we can do about it, and maybe getting someone in to help us address those issues with how to do it. Someone like Positive, as you said, Positive, you're doing Positive Wellbeing, you're a dentist, so, you know, getting someone in like you to understand and what to do, because that was actually a really big thing. And I think that was one of the prompts for Ross to sort of have that breakdown, really, because being told that every day is really harsh.
I think sometimes you can't always change what patients say, but there are so many strategies that we can provide the individual clinicians, so that I like to say, like they've got their toolkit of strategies, or they're sort of like armored up, or they're walking in prepared as much as possible. Obviously, it's a two-way street, and we want to be able to make sure the environment is positive. But beyond that, if that's not possible, there are so many things that the individual can do, even if it's like a change in the way that they view it, or reframing, or boundaries, or just like seeing it in a different way, or turning it into a joke or something like that. There are just so many things that we can do on many levels to just try to mitigate the effects of that. Maybe even after a while, I don't know, creating something that actually shows patients that that's not a nice thing to say, and that's not actually accepted, because our clinicians are human and we don't want to hear that every day. So that could just be an example of really having the staff's well-being at the center, so that we can just make sure that, you know, they're supported, and that they're thriving as much as possible, and not sort of silently suffering.
I think that might happen. Do you think sometimes as well, clinicians are a little bit isolated because they might not have their mentor on site? I can see that often as well. You know, this dentist is working this day, so I'm having this day off. And they say, you know, I'm by the phone, but they're not really there. Do you think that might be something as well?
Well, definitely. Yes, isolated work is one of the other examples of a psychosocial hazard, and definitely in the dental industry that's a really prominent factor, because even though you may be working in a clinic that's quite busy and buzzing, but the actual nature of the job, it can still be quite isolating, in terms of it might just be you and the patient and the nurse in the room, but then you can sometimes feel even more isolated, because you feel like it's just you with all of your thoughts and emotions and stress and responsibilities and ifs and, you know, so many factors. That I think something that we could encourage is knowing that isolation is quite a big concern for many clinicians. The opposite, I guess, would be a culture of collaboration and encouraging that clinician networking or support, or having a clinician group, or regular meetings to go through different cases, or even just to have a bit of a vent. It's all about creating those relational, because that's what we call protective factors. So there's not always just hazards, which is about like what we need to fix. But in the workplace, there are so many things called protective factors that protect us from, sort of buffers us against those challenging times. And I think relationships are a really strong one. So if you've got that support network and that regular, it could be with a mentor or a local study group, or something, so that you're decreasing that feeling of isolation, because it can be quite lonely, you know, throughout the whole day.
I think there's quite a few study groups around. How do you find them?
On social media or Facebook. I think they're split up by suburbs as well. I'm sure that if we go onto some of those Facebook pages, they would be able to direct us to local study groups. Or you can even just create one with the clinicians in your workplace or your uni friends. It's more about realizing that isolation can be a hazard. What can we really do to mitigate that and bolster it up? Because I think when you've got that support, it really helps during the tough times to know that you're not going through things alone, and just having that emotional support can do wonders for our mental health, and just knowing that we're not alone.
So we talked about obviously job demands, low job control with templates, poor support. perhaps isolation just with you being as a clinician. Are there any other psychosocial hazards that you'd like to share?
I guess another one, which probably a lot of people would relate to, is more about workplace relations, or leadership as well, because we don't just work on our own. So, every workplace is going to be different, like different sizes, different personalities, different leadership styles. Again, I think that's a big one because we're not just working on our own, but we are part of a system. How that system is made up, who's in it, what's culturally normal for that particular workplace, I think all play a role. Say, for example, is there a culture of collaboration, or is it a culture of competition, or is the leadership style such that it's not very positive, it's not very uplifting, it's more focused on what we didn't do right. Different approaches to leadership and that sort of creation of a positive, safe culture, like psychological safety and things like that. I think that's also a big one because, as mentioned, we spend so much time with the people at work that we can really feel the effects of the culture, how things are done, what's considered normal, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. Those are so important to make sure that the environment is a safe place that people can thrive and not worry about things they shouldn't be worrying about.
I'm a huge advocate of those foundations of success with the values and the whole induction process, clinical excellence, team dynamics and patient experience. When a clinician goes and applies for a job or they're looking for a job, they can see what the culture of that practice is like.
Yes.
And quite often the dental owners, your dentists, so sometimes leadership might not be their thing, but if they've got a strong management team that they're part of and strategically part of overall how it runs,
Yes.
they can still follow those values and instill those values and work day by day with those values. I've seen practices that have attracted clinicians because of that. And we've had Dr. Ash on our podcast. She had her values from the inception and her team have come on board because of the values that she has. And that's been a very successful thing. That's something that I totally advocate. And it was really nice that you said that. I just thought,
Yeah.
that's what I really preach, and that's what we practice, and I know it worked. And it was really lovely to hear that.
Ultimately, we're all human. So yes, we want to do good technical work and be good clinicians, but at the heart, we are all human. So we do have basic human psychological needs about teamwork, connection, being seen, being valued, aligning as well. I think all of those things, again, they're hard to see, but once you feel like you found a place that aligns with your values and that the culture feels right, you feel you can like sort of relax. You just feel very safe. And you can focus on thriving and on contributing, not being defensive and being.
What happens naturally is higher productivity,
100%.
happiness, patient feedback is amazing. That uplifts everybody as well. Everybody knows exactly what they're doing. They know their job role, and it just clicks.
It just flows. Everything's just so smooth. And as we know, the impact of positive leaders and managers is so important because, of course, everyone has a responsibility. It's a shared responsibility, but the tone and the culture and basically everything starts from the leadership, whether it's like the practice manager or other leaders, but that leadership is so important to really set the tone because, again, when someone starts with a workplace, you're an individual entering a system that already is present. I think it's so important to get that environment right from the top, and then everything just sort of trickles down because it really does start with the leader and what they're focusing on, and then everyone else will follow.
Fantastic. Have you got anything else that you'd like to share that we haven't covered with regard to what owners can do or managers?
I guess another example could be poor change management is an example of a psychosocial hazard. And I mean, that might look different in various industries, but I'm sure many dental clinics at some point would go through change management. I think that's quite an important topic because if any kind of change isn't handled correctly, again, it can really cause undue stress and uncertainty. I think that in terms of change management, there is a whole way of doing it correctly. So if you've got a restructure planned, again, keeping communication really open, getting people involved, letting them know what's happening to some degree, allowing for extra time, extra support during that change, because change is hard. But I think if we do it correctly, the negative impacts can be minimal. I personally went through a structure that probably could have been done better because the way it was done, it really stressed everyone out on top of what we were already dealing with day to day. It was not very nice, the way that it was handled, and no one knew what was happening. It was lots of uncertainty.
I'd have to say that I do see that in practice as I go in as well. Some people, I think, as you said, that open communication, so that everybody knows what is going on, they understand it, they can give feedback, which is important as well.
Exactly. And like anything, before you do the change, you consider the financial aspects or the logistics, and then we just need to add in the psychosocial part as well. Like, how is it actually going to affect people? And I think once they're involved, like, I think it's all about that safe space and getting people involved with whether it's their own well-being or new strategies or what works for them or feedback or changes happening with the clinic. I think the more people are involved with it, they're more likely to be okay with any changes or any different directions. So I think it's about talking to them, keeping that communication open.
It's really seeing those cues, because as you said, at work, you're quite often there with those people more than you are at home with your loved ones.
Very important. There's so much information out there as well. So if anyone, whether employer or employee, are curious to know more about whether they're doing something correctly or for more ideas, there's a lot of support out there.
And ADA, they're sharing what's changing as well. So of course, there's people like you who know what it's like because you've lived it and you know what can work and what can't. So you're going into that positive wellbeing space and being able to share that. People can reach out to people like you as well.
So amazing.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Anne. You're on our first series, and I was so happy that you agreed to talk about the psychosocial hazards in this series. But for more information about Anne, including links to her work and social media profiles, please check out the episode description. Thank you so much again, Anne, and have a beautiful rest of the day. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you so much, Michelle.
See you.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast or YouTube channel. Your feedback helps us continue delivering valuable content and insights from leaders in the dental industry. In our next episode of Dental Success Beyond Chairside, we'll be joined by Rochelle Fisher, founder of Dental Assisting and Beyond. Are you and your team feeling the effects of burnout? Long days in the surgery can take a real toll on both body and mind. Rochelle will share tailored advice and programs designed specifically for the dental industry to help manage these challenges. This is an episode you won't want to miss. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.